Welcome back, everyone. 歡迎再一次啦，大家返嚟到我哋嘅會場啊。In this next section, we have an exciting lineup of industry veterans in the conversation to articulate to the trends to come in Asia's gaming market. 咁下一個環節咧，我哋將會邀請到一班業界嘅資深人士，同大家一齊嚟到進行討論，分析亞洲博彩市場未來嘅趨勢。我哋都非常之榮幸啦，可以邀請到以下嘅幾位嘉賓。We are pleased to have with us MGM Resorts International 全球發展總裁 Ed Bowers, the President of Global Development at MGM Resorts International。咁接住落嚟，我哋嘅 panelist 咧都會有嚟自呢一個Murray International Group 創辦人兼主席 Now Murray, founder and chairman of Murray International Group。仲有嚟自印度啦，在線同我哋一齊啦參與嘅呢一個今次 panelist 嘅，仲有咧係嚟自呢一個 Indian Governance and Policy Project 合夥人 Ruth Garg, partner with the Indian Governance and Policy Project, who joined us online from India. 以及咧有呢個嚟自 Spectrum Gaming Group 調查部高級副總裁 Paul Bongbrecht, the Senior Vice President of Investigations at Spectrum Gaming Group, 同埋咧 Seaport Research Partners 全球博彩高級研究分析師 Vitaly Wumaski。嚟自呢個 Senior Research Analyst on Global Gaming at Seaport Research Partners, and of course moderating this exceptional panel 主持呢個咁精彩嘅討論環節咧，就係 Spectrum Gaming Group 總經理兼 CEO Frederick E. Boucher, the Managing Director and CEO of Spectrum Gaming Group。所以喺度啦，我哋都掌聲有請佢哋嚟到我哋舞台上。Please give a round of applause to all our panelists.
Thank you.
Welcome, and I'll leave the stage for you guys.
Is this on? How do you get this on?
It's on.
It's on? Okay. Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our session. We should have a very spirited session this afternoon. I'm going to give a couple of opening remarks because I want to try and set the tone. Then we're going to go to a question and answer format, and I definitely, as always, want to encourage the attendees to ask questions or comment on things and participate in the session as much as you would like. So we're going to cover trends throughout Asia, and I just wanted to highlight what at least I see as some of the major trends right now. There's been a severe, as other speakers have mentioned today, a reduction of Chinese junkets in Asia, and the norm now is minimal junkets throughout Asia. Philippines, they're prohibited effectively, and other places as well. Reliance on the junkets is not something that can be done automatically like it used to be. Also, we heard a lot of the other speakers this afternoon talk about non-gaming. Non-gaming is a vehicle to better service existing customers and attract new customers in a unique way. Vegas, as was noted earlier, 2/3 of the revenue is non-gaming, but that's unique. No other jurisdiction to date has really been able to match that at this point in time. We also see new projects being announced and proceeding through Asia. While not directly in Asia, the UAE is clearly a new market. Thailand, and we'll talk about that in more detail, is also exploring gaming opportunities. But what's the future of casinos operating in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and other jurisdictions? We're going to try and examine that issue as well. As I indicated, Thailand has announced plans for entertainment centers. Those plans are moving forward, maybe slower than people thought, but it's clearly at least going forward at this point in time, and we'll discuss that as well. We want to add in online gaming, which is mostly unregulated, and especially here in Asia where it's regulated, I don't know of any jurisdiction that's really regulating online gaming effectively at this point in time, but it's incredibly popular throughout Asia. Unfortunately, the countries who have been on the gray list of money laundering countries. One of the key reasons why is the online gaming issue as well. So what lessons can jurisdictions such as Thailand, the UAE, Sri Lanka, perhaps India down the road, take from the current trends in gaming? And we're going to discuss that today as well. So, as I indicated, each panelist is going to make a brief opening statement, and then we're going to move toward questions and answers, and hopefully your participation as well. So why don't we just walk down the line here, Ed?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So I just a couple of things. I'm going to keep it pretty brief. I've spent a considerable amount of my time and energy over the last 15 years kind of working on the Japan project, which we just broke ground on. And so I think for the next 5 years we're going to be pretty focused on developing that project. And you know, we look forward to bringing something outstanding to the marketplace. Second thing, I just wanted to pick up on something that Fred was just talking about, was this notion of non-gaming facilities. And I kind of want to link that to comments that were made in the previous presentation. You know, for me, there has to be a clear balance in terms of non-gaming and gaming facilities within these projects, which makes sense, because it all comes down to return on investment. And you know, the non-gaming is a very, very low return on investment. It's balanced by the gaming, and so generally speaking, we are looking for markets where the gaming revenues are sufficiently high in absolute terms that they can deliver a very high return on investment that allows them to spend all this money. And the cost size for these large-scale integrated resorts continue to increase, which therefore means you can only operate an integrated resort, in my view, in a market where there is fairly considerable demand. And so that effectively means that there needs to be a limited license market, or you have to have access to locals. And I think those are sort of really critical points when we think about new developments. Yeah, that's sort of all I have.
Okay, we're going to go toward Niall.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Fred. It's very interesting what's happening over this last couple of years and what's happening even in this quarter. I've been fortunate to be here since 2004, so a lot of changes, a lot of developments. We had exceptional performance here for so many years that a lot of different markets looked at Macau and said, wow, that's the model we want to follow. And unfortunately, the model that built up over here sort of got out of control with regards to the junket and the VIP market, to such an extent that it became problematic. And there was an insistence that we have to pull this back in. We have to stop relying on junkets, we have to stop relying on VIP, and we have to stop relying on, especially, sources of those markets from mainland China. So the reissuing of the licenses here and the insistence on focusing more on non-gaming is not by accident, but it's also a big lesson to be learned by new jurisdictions. And I've heard again and again over the last number of years with new jurisdictions they're going to focus in on what Macau did. And they did that to their peril. They went after the VIP Chinese markets and they've been targeted one after the other. It's a new world since this last couple of years, and those markets that are going to do well are ones who are going to focus not on the mainland Chinese market, not on what you saw in the Philippines with these POGO operations. You're going to see more and more of a model that was closer or akin to what was accomplished in Vegas over the years. We were talking about 75% non-gaming, 25% gaming, and it was an overall synergistic offering for an entertainment and a destination product. I think they're the models that governments are looking for. They're not looking for these situations that you had here in 2013. And so I think as we go forward, if we're looking at markets who are interested in a balanced approach to create an exceptional integrated resort that is backed by exceptional casino revenues to allow them to do very solid non-gaming offerings that couldn't be offered otherwise. So for example, a big nice place that we had in Vegas at the Sands with 3,000 rooms supported by gaming revenue was a very successful model. That's the type of model that was tried to be replicated here, but ran into difficulties because we weren't bringing in the sufficient MICE space to places like this. So regulations will have a lot to do with it moving forward, but I think that if Beijing had its way and could wave a magic wand tomorrow, it would have 75% non-gaming, 25% gaming, a mass market here from mainland China coming in, spending under their 9,000 RMB per day, have a leisurely and entertaining experience, then head off happily home. And that's where they would like us to move towards. And I think that's where the direction is going. For here, I don't think we'll see 75-25 in my lifetime, but we'll move towards it. But I think newer markets, if they come from that perspective, they'll have a better chance of getting the regulations passed and something put in place. So hopefully we can explore some of that today.
Thank you, Niall. Drew, we're going to bring you in at this point, who's joining us from India. You want to make your opening statement?
Yeah, thank you, Fred. Thank you to G2E Asia for inviting me. Apologies for not being there. Technically, I had some medical urgency because of which I couldn't travel. While I heard Ali talking about integrated resorts, etc., and entertainment product. In India, just to give a brief background about India, because that will lay context to how to look at India, and then further question we can discuss it. India is a federal structure where betting and gambling, when we talk about gaming, we here will understand betting and gambling based on games of chance. They are regulated by the states, different states at the state level. Games of skill, which we don't consider them as betting and gambling, even if they are played with money. So when we say online gaming in India, we usually mean games of skill played with stakes. So in betting and gambling at state level, most states have prohibited betting and gambling. Few states have a licensing regime, but the market is very small because those states are quite small, and some of them are offshore ships on which they run. Some have very small states and they have small, casino models, etc. And online betting and gambling, sports betting, generally sort of restricted in the country. Our games of skill has flourished in the meanwhile. They include fantasy, rummy, poker, sort of formats, and they are right now valued at about $3 billion in the country. However, the interesting part is that while betting and gambling is restricted in most states, the illegal and grey market has sort of taking a shape where it is about 10 times bigger than the legal scale online gaming market, real money gaming. Correct? So right now estimates suggest that the illegal gaming market is about 20 to 30 billion. So there are a lot of conversations within the Indian government, also across the board, how to control this menace. Correct? Now there are also certain political and moral reasons why a strict licensing regime allowing online or physical sort of gaming markets, betting and gambling jurisdictions may open up. But those are conversations that are still happening. But still, we do see the potential of India when it comes to entertainment in terms of gaming from the state gaming industry, because that industry grew at about 25 to 30% over the last 5 years. There are about 3 unicorns within that state gaming online industry in real money gaming. So we do see that potential. However, we also have this huge menace of the grey market from the betting and gambling side. So let's just give you a context of what India is looking like, and we can maybe take up more details or the answers of it during questions.
Thank you. Paul?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this session. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Thailand, because that's where I live. And, what they say, a week's a long time in politics. Well, a year seems to have been a lifetime in the process of legalization of entertainment centres in Thailand. So This time last year, I think everyone was very optimistic, and the government was making all the right noises, and they seemed to be going in the right direction. But a year on, it seems a very different story, that people are not so optimistic and actually realise that there are many obstacles to gaming legalization and to the establishment of an integrated resort industry. And, we're probably going to discuss some of those in this session, but if you're watching the Thai news every night, what you see is very, very detailed discussions of many of the issues that until very recently haven't been discussed at all. And I'd say one of the biggest issues is where the entertainment centres, casinos, will be located. And again, this has not been well done by the government, because one minute you have 10, then there's 5, then there's 3. Now we've got probably some clarification that they will be in Bangkok, Phuket, Pattaya, most likely maybe Chiang Mai. But the reality is that a lot of people are already discussing internally within Thailand where they would like to have casinos, but more pertinently where they don't want casinos. And I don't know if you're familiar with the term NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, but a lot of people do not want to have entertainment centres where they live. So this has become a big issue, and moreover, the political parties are now split as to whether they should proceed with these now with legalization at all. So I would say that there are politically there are many obstacles to overcome. In addition, the government itself, the main party in the government, the Thai party, wants to have casinos. But the fact that they're so keen to proceed and apparently so quickly is also an issue for many of the other political parties, because they have the will, but why are they trying to push it so quickly? Is it simply because they only have 2 years left until the next election, or are there other reasons that aren't so clear? So there are many questions that remain, and I think Ed, in his presentation earlier, touched on two of the biggest problems for potential investors, one being political risk. I mean, there's a lot of political risk still in Thailand, because we're only 2 years post military government, and so it's not beyond the bounds of one's imagination that there could be another coup if things go wrong again. And then you also have the investor risk, that, the corruption and other problems. The government is now, I think they've learned over the last month or two that, there's a lot of internal opposition, and that they're saying the right things again. Responsible gaming will be very important, and that the integrated resorts will be well regulated. But of course, talking is cheap, and actually implementation or enforcement is not going to be easy. But I think that they are saying the right things. I think most people agree the potential is there, and a lot of the investment community and the operators would like to have or would like to see legalization of entertainment complexes. But whether there will be any open by 2030 is debatable and highly unlikely. So on that note, I'll thank you, and I'm happy to take questions after during the Q&A session.
Yes, we'll have a lot of questions, I'm sure, on Thailand coming up, but Vitaly, why don't you make your opening remarks?
Yeah, so let me just touch on the overall Asian gaming market. If we kind of look across the spectrum, we have basically 3 standout markets, I would say, right? Macau, which Neil talked about, which is a very unique situation that really cannot be replicated. We have Singapore, a very strong duopoly market with a significant amount of government support in one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Again, can't really be replicated in other jurisdictions. And then we have the Philippines, which is almost a Wild West, very kind of laissez-faire, capitalist type environment. They've introduced legal online gaming, domestically, which is really important as kind of a first step in the online gaming universe in Asia. And then we have a whole host of other countries that have effectively gotten things wrong. If you look at Korea, if you look at Vietnam, these are jurisdictions that have decided it's in the country's best interest to not allow locals to gamble outside of Kwangan land in Korea, which are problematic when you start talking about large-scale integrated resort development. If you're going to do a foreigners-only casino operation, as some of these governments have wanted, what you're really talking about are small-scale casino operations, which may be fine for tax revenue, a small bit of employment, and keeping kind of the social negative attributes of gaming out of your own society, but they're actually meaningless with respect to impact on the country's economy, on employment, on tax revenue. So I think as new jurisdictions contemplate moving forward with gaming, the key question I think is always, what is the point of doing this? What is the purpose behind legalizing gaming? In essence, most jurisdictions should be looking at this as kind of a multi-pronged development scheme, which is employment, tax revenue, tourism, potentially, and finally, effectively circumventing illegal gambling, or reducing illegal gambling for a legal environment where customers have protections, there's responsible gaming programs, there are potentially limits put on people from getting into too much trouble. And so far, when you look across Asia, most jurisdictions get all these things wrong, outside of the three that I mentioned earlier. So when we talk about Thailand, for example, and kind of the big question is, what are they going to wind up doing? I think obviously the first question is going to be, will they allow casinos? So assuming the answer is yes, then the more important question is, what are they actually going to allow? The more that we hear about limiting locals, the more that we're going to see smaller and smaller development opportunities, smaller and smaller employment opportunities. And it's probably in the long run not what the country actually needs or wants. And I think the whole education process of governments, while most operators and other consulting firms have tried to educate governments on this, it often falls on deaf ears. So I think as we look forward across the gaming industry in Asia, I think the biggest hindrance to kind of robust growth opportunities in new markets is the government themselves in terms of what they actually want to see versus what is actually realistic. And I think that's where the challenges are going to lie for this industry going forward as we look at jurisdictional expansion.
Great. Well, thank you, Vitaly. You've heard different views here, and we're going to explore them going forward. Let's start with Japan, and Ed is obviously the recipient of most of these questions, but Vitaly and anyone else, please feel free to jump in. You know, there have been media reports that some of the unsuccessful casino bidders from the prior years and prefectures that didn't get through the process are interested in participating in reopening the licensing process in Japan earlier than was originally thought. So, Ed, I guess you're there most of the time. How likely is this to happen, and why do you think it's going to happen?
So yeah, we have heard similar reports. I do believe that the government is conducting some kind of process. There are 2 remaining licenses that would be available. I think there are probably some jurisdictions that are still open to bidding. Obviously, I think the largest cities would make the most sense because of the scale, size, and cost of these developments and the government requirements. One of the reasons why many companies left Japan last time in the first round, well, firstly because certain jurisdictions didn't make it to the finish line like Oklahoma, but secondly, some of the requirements in the law are excessively sort of stringent and constraining, and certain companies were not prepared to take the risk on some of these issues. And so I think that we're now essentially 4 to 5 years later, really, than the first process. And I would say we still have the same rules. And then one of the differences that we have is we do have a little bit more certainty about how these rules will be put in place. But we also have much higher costs of construction. And so, to me, I think there's a number of issues that the new players will have to come into this process. One is going to be the construction and looking at their returns. Can they make a decent return on investment given the cost of construction and what's required under the law, and then the revenues that they can get. Number two is what's called the Article 2 requirements. The Article 2 requirements in Japan explain exactly what you're required to build. And this is typical of other jurisdictions as well, where the government says, we want these things, we want you to do these things. As an operator, I think that we would argue sometimes that it would be better, frankly, for the government to ask us to tell the government what things could be put into an integrated resort, and then the government can say yes or no to those things, because we probably know better what's necessary in an integrated resort. But anyway, notwithstanding that, I think that the Article 2 requirements increase the cost generally of these projects, increase the amount of stuff that needs to be in there. And then I think the third issue is there's been no real changes to any of the rules that were problematic for entrance the first time around. Tax rate's still pretty high, entry requirements are complicated. There is an Article 10 requirement that requires you to continually renew your concession every 5 years with your host community, despite a very, very large investment. So, when I put all that together, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to get more new entrants into this process in Japan as they look at the requirements as they stand now. It's possible the government may provide some accommodations, maybe tweak some of these rules. I would certainly advocate for that, and by doing that, they may end up with a better outcome.
Vitaly, do you have anything to add there?
Look, I think one of the other issues on top of what Ed mentioned is just the local prefecture city that actually would like to move forward on this. There was a considerable drop-off in interest as that process unfolded, which led to cities basically pulling out of the process, and with those cities pulling out, the operators that were interested in those areas pulling out as well. And the cities that we were left with outside of Osaka, which was pretty much locked up by MGM, the cities had very little interest from any of the large-scale casino operators. So as this process potentially unfolds, I think the first step is going to be to really see what cities actually are going to move forward on a realistic process, and I think that will then determine which operators of scale would potentially be interested. Now that's on top of, obviously, all the issues that I'd mentioned, most of which haven't really changed from where they were 5-6 years ago. So I think we have to wait and see kind of how this unfolds. I think from a demand perspective, from a market potential perspective, Japan is an enormous opportunity. If MGM is going to be the only operator in Japan, it's going to be a home run project for them, even with the high costs of development. But the country definitely has room for multiple projects of scale and for all of them to be successful. But I think it's a wild card at this stage.
One more question to Ed, and then we'll open up Japan to the attendees here. In most of the estimates of the market, China played a role. VIP is obviously going to be difficult, but how do you see the mass market in China? Will they allow travel and tourism with people participating in gaming in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about this is we're going to have a property that probably has excess demand, and where that excess demand is is internal to Japan or coming in from overseas, I think we'll be able to find ways to manage that demand, which I think therefore makes this question, it's a little bit better for us. And I think there's therefore ultimately less specific reliance, and we can go to other places, other countries as necessary. What I would say though is, Chinese visitors coming to Japan are now pretty much getting back to 2019 levels. In 24, they were about 73% of the 2019 levels. But if you include Taiwan and Hong Kong, they're at about 94% of pre-COVID levels, because both of those countries are coming, in some big numbers. And Osaka is a very popular location for Chinese tourists. So I do think that, we're still going to, Japan is very popular, we're still going to get a lot of tourism. I think that we'll be able to manage the gaming play appropriately, depending on the sort of geopolitical circumstances.
Hey, anybody have any questions or comments to Ed primarily and Vitaly on this issue? Seeing none, we'll move along here. Let's get Paul is going to be the lead person here, but please, anybody, please chime in here. Paul, in Southeast Asia, Japan and Korean gamblers are becoming increasing importance in terms of the market segments and everything. So, do you expect this trend to continue for Southeast Asia?
Well, I wonder whether it will. I think the Koreans have been vital for the Philippine market, and obviously there are Korean junkets as well, and so whether the Korean government is willing to allow Korean junkets to continue unfettered in the way they have been operating over the last 2 or 3 years remains to be seen. Likewise, the Japanese market is an interesting one. I don't think it's that significant compared to, say, the Vietnamese market, which has also grown enormously post-COVID, and it is also a very significant player in the Philippines in particular. So I think the Vietnamese market could continue to grow as long as the government allows people to travel freely overseas. But with Korea, for the time being, I would say yes. But in the long term, maybe 5 to 10 years, we'll have to wait and see.
And now with Singapore, Macau, and Japan coming online in the next several years, how do countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, stay relevant in this area?
I'm not sure that they really do in the bigger picture, I'm afraid. I mean, the Lao government has stated clearly that they don't want to have any more casinos, and whether the few that exist now will continue remains to be seen. Cambodia, as we've seen, has had problems with Naga. Sinukville, they basically closed down the online gaming sector, but seems to have started up again illegally. So I don't know if they'll be able to control that. But obviously the regulator is now playing a greater role in Cambodia. But attracting tourists is difficult, and the Chinese market has been reduced, and that's had a huge impact on Cambodia. Vietnam, they had the pilot project at the Corona Resort in Phu Quoc. That has now come to an end. So I think what would be interesting from an international perspective is what the government actually found from that pilot project. What is the result of that? Are they going to extend it or start it again? And will they extend it to other integrated resorts? Because if they do that, then I think Vietnam could be of significant interest to international developers and operators.
Vitaly or Niall, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, I think the one thing to really understand is that local markets are really important. Local customers are really important. So, as Paul said, Vietnam is irrelevant because even with the Corona property, there is no local market. Locals aren't allowed to gamble. So, what we've seen is properties either relying on extensive junket play, where high commissions incentivize junkets and VIP players to come to that casino. That's fairly small scale. Or you're treading water, which is kind of what most of these locals or foreign-owned casinos do, whether they're in Vietnam or whether they're in Korea or elsewhere. I think these other kind of smaller jurisdictions are largely kind of irrelevant. Laos is irrelevant. Whether or not they shut down their casinos or not, it doesn't move the needle at all. Cambodia, I echo your comments. Naga is, I think, in serious trouble long term, especially if Thailand moves forward and legalizes. So I think overall, I think the key point on all this, whether you look at Macau, Singapore, whether you look at other jurisdictions that are actually successful, that local aspect, allowing domestic play, becomes so critical if you want to do anything of scale, right? If you actually want to achieve government objectives, the local market is critically important. And I think on Japan, I would echo the same comments, which is the Japanese market, in my view, is going to be largely domestic. Of course, you'll have foreign play, and it'll be significant, but it's going to be a largely domestic market, even with all of the restrictions that are put in place for locals. Otherwise, it will not be successful. So,
look, that raises the issue. I think Korea is going to be a market segment there as well. Does anybody see Korea taking changes to? They allow locals at K-Land, but the ones in Incheon don't have local play. Do you see that changing anytime soon?
I don't think there's any indication that they're going to change the law. I mean, the law is very strict in Korea. You're not actually allowed to gamble anywhere in the world outside of Kwangan Land.
Obviously, not enforcing that.
Not really enforced unless you're a pop star who decides to go online and showcase the fact that you're gambling overseas. But it's very stringent. I think Korea has very serious concerns around gaming addiction, which is very prevalent in the video gaming industry. I'm loath to think that Korea is going to move down a path of legalizing locals anytime in the foreseeable future.
But K1 is expanding significantly.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's expanding because if you go there, you see how busy it is, and I think from the government's perspective, there is this balancing act between allowing people to have some outlet to gamble versus just shutting it off completely, which is why Kwangan Land actually exists. Right? Because I think the government does realize that there's going to be a group of players who will wind up gambling anywhere. It doesn't matter if they can't do it in Korea. So I think it's a bit of a hedge and an opportunity for certain locals that have high prevalence of gambling to actually be able to go somewhere at least locally rather than go online or overseas.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the audience following up on this? Obviously, these are important issues. We're moving on. Okay, we'll get a question out of the audience one way or another. But let's talk to India. Drew, if you can what is the potential for legalization of casino gaming? I know Goa has some casinos down there, legal or otherwise, but what's the situation with the potential legalization of casinos in any state?
If you see, like when you say Goa is a state, very popular for tourism and coastal state. There are a couple of small states like in Nagaland, Sikkim. There are a few other territories where casinos are legal and they are licensed. These licensing conditions are quite tough. These are very restricted licensing regimes generally. Just to give you how big the market is, the leader of legalized licensed casino operator is about less than $100 billion in revenue, correct? So currently the casino market in India definitely is quite small compared to the online RMG gaming industry. In terms of opening, there were conversations in different states on an integrated model, right? And we were discussing that. The challenge right now in most of the states is that, larger states, is that it has to be near a major metropolitan sort of establishment, correct? It has to be open for foreigners as well as domestic clientele. But to do that, there has to be enough political capital that needs to be spent by the local state governments to open it up. What we have realized is that most of the states, considering the current political scenario, are not really open to open it up at the moment. But they do realize the tax revenue implications of it. So right now, most of them are trying to figure out when does the political capital sort of does not outweigh the tax revenue. So there are a couple of states where there are news reports that they said that they're looking at the integrated model, etc., in Andhra, etc. However, the government came out and said, we are being misconstrued, etc., generally. So for casinos, barring those 3-4 states, I don't think so in near future for next 1 or 2 years, I don't think so there will be any regulation which sort of opens legal licensed casinos at the moment. On the online bit, yes, I think there are certain conversations we'll have to see. Generally, but even on the skill gaming spectrum, we are seeing a lot of innovation where the market share is rising. But on the casino bit, for your specific question, it seems a little different for next 1 year or so for any government to come to terms in terms of spending the political capital, given the social sort of negative perception around casinos.
Well, what about online gaming and sports betting? We know there's a lot of gray area online gaming taking place in India. Is there any effort to crack down on that or legalize online gaming?
Yeah, so there is. So basically, if you look at online gaming, on the skill side, I think some folks in the audience may be aware of this. On the skill side, it seems that is flourishing even after a very massive tax increase, and we can discuss that later. On the chance side, which we call betting and gambling, most of the operations are still illegal. However, the federal government is cracking down on them. Prevention of money laundering, and there are FATF and prevention of money laundering conversations that are happening on cracking down. What they want to do is they want to go to payment aggregators, internet service providers, etc., and try to figure out how to sort of crack down on that. Because right now what is happening is, considering that about $20-30 billion of grey market transactions are happening in the country, and they are on the back of spurious financial sort of networks. And those networks pose not just a revenue-based tax evasion, but they also represent a national security threat for the country. So the Indian government is looking at this grey market not only from a moralistic or a revenue point of view, but also from a national security threat point of view. Because these grey markets can also very easily fund terror financing outfits, etc. So over there, the government is taking multi-pronged approach. The state governments are sort of blocking these sites day in, day out. The Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the regulators under it are trying to figure out ways how to stop this. There is a crackdown by the central bank on the banks to make sure that there are no mule accounts that are present. So while all these efforts are happening, but we still have to see whether it can be stopped. At least from the efforts till now, I think there is some time, but it's not really creating any difference. So after all this experimentation, maybe let's say in a year or so, I think the question will again be raised, correct? If a crackdown on grey market is not doing any damage to the illegal grey market, is legalization and a strict regulation then is an answer, correct? And what we think is that a debate will happen if this crackdown by the government is not successful in next 6 to 12 months.
Right, thank you. Let's move on to Macau. Niall, we talked a little bit about the non-gaming already in general terms, but let's get into some of the details here. Obviously, the government wants non-gaming expansion, but talk about the process and what the ultimate goals are here. The previous session noted it was about 10 or 15% of overall revenue. Nevada, Vegas is about 2/3 non-gaming. So what has to be done here, and how is the government trying to engineer this?
The government has very clearly stated in the reissuing of the licenses that each of the integrated resorts must focus in on non-gaming to a much greater extent. There was a guideline that was issued in November 2023. It's 178 pages from the government stating these are the overall objectives, this is what we want you to do, this is where we want to go, and gave some broad directions. There's an awful lot of words in there, but the goals and the specific targets are extremely vague. So for example, they say, let's try and reach within 10 years the figure we had in 2019. I mean, like, I would love to work in a job that gave me that type of strict goal. I mean, the original objectives that came out of the government were just not defined enough. There was no solid strategic plan. There was not a number of clear lines for the IRs to follow. And there were requirements with regards to revitalization of areas, local areas that were given to each of the IRs, that were given specific areas to work on. Now, they all found that very strange because, one, they're not urban planners or architects, and they were wondering, how are we going to do that? That's not our area of expertise. So the initial requests of the IRs were they were received with great enthusiasm because the IRs wanted to get their license renewed, but the process by which they were going to follow this and make it happen was very vague. Now, the new chief executive and the new, in particular, the Secretary for Economy and Finance are taking a very different approach. They've gone back to this 178-page document. They've looked at what plans and processes the IRs were intending to put in place, and they're putting in place specific task forces under each of the major zones of diversification they want to work on. And they're working with them to get very specific on what they're going to do in the next quarter, in the next year, and what targets are going to be measurable that they can make happen. So it's a very welcome change, both on the part of overall the economy, and especially SMEs, are very concerned about what was going to happen and what some of the IRs are going to do. So, for example, in the revitalization projects, you've had issues where large IRs would go into a specific area, put initiatives in place with their large budgets behind them that hurt the SMEs. So, for example, they pedestrianised areas. They then gave food and beverage vouchers to go and visit the big IRs, and it really hurt the small SMEs who were relying on the sale of that Coca-Cola or the egg tart or whatever it was. And so there were misguided and misled initiatives that now are being brought under review and readdressed. So we really see some positive change at the moment, and it's going to take a lot of time, but there are solid initiatives to put together expert task forces that involve public and private, which is very common in what we saw in jurisdictions like Singapore, and then bring in best practice experts from around the world to help us in diversification in the 1+4 areas, which was not thought of before. And this is something that's very positive. And you can see this action in the last couple of months, and it's really growing in momentum. They're also starting to reach out to other countries who are very good at these diversified industries, such as high finance, etc., and pharmaceuticals, and medical tourism is a huge thing that they want to push, but they have to do it in conjunction with some medical tourism models. So they're starting to look at other areas to get best practice to put in place.
Like Thailand,
yes.
medical tourism. Mm-hmm.
So there is very positive initiative, but the first 2 years, quite frankly, it was like, I think the way to describe it is, if 26,000 people at the start time of a marathon, somebody pulls the trigger and 26,000 people run in 26,000 directions because there was no track for the marathon laid and no finish line. But they are back to correct this now. They're trying to put these guidelines in place and where the finish line is going to be for this diversification strategy.
So have any projects actually been announced here in Macau, or they're in the pre-planning stage?
A lot of non-gaming initiatives have been announced. However, one of the issues is all of the IRs have identified that they need extra room capacity. They want to add additional room capacity. But all 6 have been asked to commit this 18 billion over the 10 years. However, development and adding of rooms is not included in that 18 billion spend. So there isn't a lot of incentive for the IRs to do some of the things that are really required in order to drive some of the other elements. So for example, it's been required to bring in more entertainment and bring in more MICE business. But the problem is we've only 45,000 rooms in Macau, 70% is comped. Most of the rooms are 4 and 5 star. And if somebody wants to come to a MICE event, they can't get it. They can't get the room, they can't afford it. And therefore, putting a MICE event in Macau is uncompetitive compared to an 85,000 market in Hong Kong, so we can't get the big shows. So there's cart before the horse issues that need to be addressed here. And another big one is infrastructure. In order to bring us to more of a mass market, we need volume of people. So you have a place like this, 120,000 people on a nice day. That drives your mass table. But we have fabulous infrastructure coming right to our doorstep. But as soon as they step inside Macau, it's gridlock. So there's a lot of catching up to do in order to make this diversification model that they dream of a reality. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I can definitely say that this new government and administration has taken a different tack. And they're moving towards what I believe is needed, a public-private strategic plan involving all stakeholders with monthly, quarterly, yearly goals and specific targets.
One unrelated non-gaming question is that some of the satellite casinos are in the process of closing this year, and what do you think the impact's going to be in terms of the revenue and other issues related to the Cotai casinos?
The issue of the satellite casinos is one that goes back from the 1990s. It was a very difficult issue. And it was one, they were created to stop some of the issues that were in Macau out there. I believe that those issues have gone away. A lot of that became junket operators that worked with and in conjunction with these satellite casinos. I believe that there is a way forward, but the statement from the government has been it's up to the concessions to deal with the sub-concessions, that they've given enough advice and guidance on how to deal with this. I believe, again, that's gone back to your marathon with no guidelines. I think we could have some issues coming out from there, because there will be, of course, satellite operators wanting more from the deal than possibly a concession may want to offer. So I think we're going to have some issues coming out.
They've been talking about this for 20 years, as you've indicated. Let's spend a little time on Thailand, and because I think that's really very topical at this point in time. A year ago, 2 years ago, there seemed to be a political consensus supporting IRs or the entertainment center. So that consensus doesn't exist today, Paul, so why do you think it's changed? Yes.
Okay.
Is there another Paul?
So I think the consensus on legalizing gambling still exists. I think for the most part, politicians recognize that there is widespread gambling, mostly illegal gambling in Thailand, and they have said that they would like to bring that into the open. It's a huge part of the black economy, and they would also like to tax gambling where they can. So I think the consensus is that where the consensus is split is due to political distrust amongst various factions. And I think the the fact is that the government has made missteps by not probably doing enough research and preparation and communication prior to moving ahead with the political process of legalization. So I think that, and in fact they've come out and said, for instance, that they're going to do in-depth feasibility studies, economic impact analyses, etc., once the law has passed. But actually, I think it would have been far better for them to have done that first, not only so that they understand better what they should be doing, but also because it will give confidence to the public. And I think this is an issue that the public doesn't have a lot of confidence in politics. Well, I don't think many people do anyway, have confidence in politicians these days, and that's especially true in Thailand. And the fact that they seem to be rushing this process through Parliament also is giving a lot of the public and other political parties pause for thought. So I think that's really where things have kind of gone wrong. And I think that they should have been given a lot more consideration as to the regulation of a casino industry and transparency to the process. And now the government is addressing some of these issues in public, but it remains to be seen whether people will actually believe what they're saying. So I think that's where we are now, and remains to be seen what happens next and whether people will actually believe what they're being told.
Well, there has been some recent articles and some statements by the government to try and right the ship a little bit, but Vitaly or Ed or both of you, what do they need to do to really attract the first-tier companies in international finance? And they seem to have not really thought that part out yet.
Yeah, look, it goes back to what I said earlier. The government needs to figure out what it is they actually want from this process first, and then lay it out in a way where investors can come in and understand whether or not it'll be a viable investment of the scale that they want to see. Right? There's a difference between what the government wants and what's actually feasible. Right? There's always this big disconnect between reality and fantasy. If the government wants a large-scale industry with job creation, with tax revenue, and with tourism, the rules have to be such that allow an investor to come in and spend billions of dollars with adequate returns related to the risk of a new market in order to actually do what the government hopes to have done. And again, I think the problem is when governments look at other jurisdictions that have no resemblance to what their individual country jurisdiction actually is, and try to apply that approach to their country, you fail. And that's been a risk, and that's been a problem in several jurisdictions across Asia and elsewhere, where they haven't looked at what actually your own country needs. So I think the first step for the government is to actually go back to the drawing board and figure out what it is that this industry needs to look like. Because I'm not really sure, based on everything that's been disclosed so far, they actually know.
And that, I mean, they always talk about we want to be Singapore and follow Singapore, but I don't think they really have a clue in terms of the hard work, the years of.
And that's a fail. That's a fail right there, because Singapore is a unique place.
It just, these things just don't fall from trees. That's I guess the main point. Ed?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with all of that. I mean, I think there's a basic principle. Each jurisdiction needs to craft its own laws in this area based on the nuances of kind of what their existing policies are and the objectives that they specifically want to get out of this. And then it goes back to Vitaly's point about Singapore and Fred's point on Singapore. Singapore spent, multiple years working on that policy and came out with what was a great policy that was incredibly effective and very successful and managed to be a win-win for both the operator and for the government. And we will, we go to these new jurisdictions and we say, look at Singapore, it's great, you should copy Singapore. but they should copy Singapore, but with a kind of localized aspect as well. And they need to understand why Singapore did this, why Singapore did something else, and you may have to do things differently in these countries. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done that just doesn't get done. And so, the biggest thing that I would say about any jurisdiction is they need to really arm themselves with knowledge about our industry. And so it does mean doing a feasibility study beforehand, so you kind of know what the expectations need to be. Even when we compare statutes, what could argue the finance statute is too short, doesn't have enough detail in it. But you could equally argue that that's not a bad way to go, because they're going to fill it in with detailed laws in the future, and they're going to carefully consider the detailed laws. So what's right for one country may not be right for another country. I think they just, more work is required. But I am more optimistic, I think, than Paul about where Thailand may end up.
So basically, we're seeing what's happened in Japan, maybe happening in Thailand. The opposition to legalization seems to have the initiative. They're portraying the worst side of gambling, the crime side, the socially responsible gaming side, and the government really hasn't responded to that. So how do you see, Paul, especially you're there every day, we know they've discussed it, we know the universities have discussed it, but why is not the government more aggressive in responding to these concerns?
Well, I think they have been reasonably aggressive actually over the last couple of weeks. The Prime Minister has come out and tried to explain a little bit more what an integrated resort is. Members of the government focus very much on the 10% aspect, that it's only 10%, casinos only 10% of the integrated resort. And while that would be the maximum. And while that's true, that actually doesn't really comfort people that much, because obviously it's the vital part, the beating part of the entertainment centre or integrated resort. But I think that it's a hard sell, because people in Thailand, they see that there are laws all over the place that aren't being followed and aren't being enforced. So saying that we will enforce whatever laws they bring in, and that they will regulate the casinos very strictly, doesn't actually give people that much confidence that it will happen. So obviously, if they can give more detail as to how they're going to go about that, then I think that will, it's communication. And there's been a lack of communication on the government's part, as there was, I think, in Japan. They need to have more public debates about the merits, the benefits, and the negative aspects of having a casino industry. And they need to have debates about public policy. And as Vitaly said, what is the public policy? I don't think any of us actually know right now, but there are definitely places where they can look and say, this is what we want, and this is how we're going to achieve it. And I think so far no one has actually articulated that very clearly. So if they start doing that, that would be a good first step.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the attendees? This is certainly a topical area, but yes.
Yes, hi. Thank you for sharing. And I do have a question. As a Macanese, I do care a little bit more and focus more on Macau's gaming industry. And I have a question is that we can see Macau's gaming revenue is decreasing. And let's say just within the 5 years, the future 5 years, do you guys will think that the Macau gaming revenue will continue to decrease? And the other question is that we can see that either the government or the 6IRs, they have been trying their best to attract more concerts, entertainment shows, non-gaming industries to Macau. But as we can see, the target audience or the tourists aren't expanding as much as what we all the parties have expected. So do you think what kind of factors have affected this kind of result? Is it because of the target audience that we focused on is not the right sections, or is it because of the games, or is it because of the shows or entertainments that we bring into Macau is not really what we have expected? So this is my question, and thank you.
Thank you. Niall, why don't you take a stab at that?
Yeah, sure. This is a period of adjustment. If you look at the unreal situation back in 2013, you had a massive amount of VIP play. We're converting this market away from junket and VIP. It was going to premium mass, now it's going to become a mass market. I think the reality over the next 10 years is we're going to become a mass market. If we're doing premium mass or above, it's going to come from international play. So it's an adjustment. Now, if we're running out of money and we're not getting the amount of money that's needed for the GTR, for the base budget, as the government has stated, we need to reach 22 billion per quarter, the taps will be turned off. What I mean by that is, you see in the first quarter of this year, a 50% increase from G2E alone, which is a simple test zone. And we can increase that penetration rate of 1.9 again to Beijing's intent. And so the issue though is the congestion that's going to cause, because we don't have the infrastructure to handle those numbers. But the ferry terminal at Bali Airport was built to a capacity of 60 million a year. So was the cross-border, which are continuing to expand. So that's something that will remain as a reality. So it's an adjustment period. So your fear of is gaming revenue going to continue to decline? It's still adjusting to what we would call a new normal and a normal that we can handle. But we have to bring a volume back up to the 40 million, but then we have a lot of infrastructural changes to make before we can handle the 60 million. If we get to a 60 million with a mass market, we'll be at higher revenues than we were back in the past. But the point is, it's a changing market. Now, bringing in the non-gaming, again, we're putting in things that are not competitive. So, I'll give you a perfect example. The Kai Tak Stadium up in Hong Kong, wonderful facility, 55 capacity, all weather year round. We put in a concrete slab next to Grand Ball Palace and called it a comparative non-gaming offering. That's not going to work. So if we're going to do it, we're going to do it seriously. We've got to put in non-gaming elements that are really world-class, world-beating, at a price that people can afford. And the only way you can do it at an affordable price is to bring in the volumes. So it's got the product has got to match what's going on locally in order to make that really happen. If you look at some of the offerings that the integrated resorts have put on, they are not comparable to what's available back in mainland China. Some of the fantastic restaurants that are available to them just over the border, some of the pricings they have in the hotels are so low with great offerings. If we can't match that, we're not going to draw them in. So you've seen in the last year and in this last quarter, you have a 20% increase. We're up to 60% day trip now, with an even shortened day trip and overnight stay. The overnight stay has gone down from 1.2 to 1.1, and you've got a 60 to 40 ratio now of day tripper versus overnight stay. That's not going to change unless the product changes, and that's going to take a long time. But what we will see is, I believe, an increase in day trippers. I think you'll see the dangerous phenomenon that's happening in Hengqin. We don't have enough rooms here. There are now estimated to be 25,000 illegal, semi-legal hotels in those towers over there in the Hengqin island. And that's going to continue, and it could be dangerously so if it's not regulated better. But we need more hotel product, but I think in the interim, the next few years, you're going to see more and more day trippers until we get our product to a level that is affordable to bring in more non-gaming business.
Thank you. Well, we're running out of time, so we're going to say the last question for all the panelists. Rank in order the leading markets you see in Asia 10 years from now. So why don't we just start with Ed, and we'll work Drew in and everybody else.
I think Macau's still going to be number one. I like Japan to potentially go into number 2 place. If it has more than one casino. So if Japan ends up with 2 casinos, I think maybe it could, so 2+ casinos, it could end up in the number 2 spot. And then I think it's Singapore and or Thailand. I think Thailand's
You are optimistic.
I'm optimistic of Thailand. So I mean, 10 years time from now, I'm going to say Macau, Japan, Thailand. Singapore drops to 4.
Okay. Niall?
10 years. And then if
you have to look into your profit.
So I would say Macau is still going to remain because they can always turn that tap on. I think if Thailand passes the law and they have multiple casinos, I think they can displace Singapore within 10 years because they'll move a lot more rapidly and there'll be a number of areas. I think Singapore will still keep a pretty tight hold on where they are as 3rd place. But UAE has potential, but longer term. Again, if they move quickly and each of the 7 other Emirates turn on 1 or 2 more, you could then come to 3 IRs within that jurisdiction and overtake Singapore. I'm a bit skeptical on Japan's pace of regulatory change, so I'm afraid that there won't be more than the 1 operator for a while, and that's why I said within 10.
Okay, we're telling Drew, where's India going to be 10 years from now?
So, just before India, I'll say Macau again, in my opinion. I would say that Thailand, if things are optimistic and if they pan out well, Thailand will attribute the reason that what we are seeing is a lot of Indian population wants to now go to Thailand, even and much more affordable for them compared to the Indian destinations for tourism, not just for gaming. So I think if Thailand is progressive about it, I think Thailand could be a big competitor, not just from across the world, but especially from South Asia. From India, I think a couple of states which are new states relatively, and they are looking at a lot of revenue. If they open up, and if they open up a multi-casino integrated resort system, I think you could see it competing with Singapore only on domestic consumption. Because there is a massive domestic consumption that is out there which is untapped. So I think if a couple of states open a multi-integrated resort system, even if it's 3 each or 4 each IRs in those states, around the tourist destination, I think India can beat them. And because it's a 10-year sort of horizon that we're looking at, I think after the next 3 to 4 years, it is possible for those conversations to turn into reality.
Okay, thank you. And I see the red light flashing. So, Paul, what are your choices? And we'll end up with Vital.
Okay, Macau, Singapore, Philippines. Japan will be in 4th place, as long as there's just 1 casino.
Well, we're going to keep this for the record. In 10 years, we'll regroup the
Thailand won't be featured.
Yes. Vitaly?
Yeah, I mean, if you assume Thailand doesn't happen, and if you assume MGM is the only property in Japan, then I think you throw those out. The question is going to be around Singapore and Philippines and which one is ahead. And I think Philippines may have an edge if the continued growth that we're seeing in iGaming, online gaming continues. That I think could propel them above Singapore in 10 years. Even with the Marina Bay Sands and the Resorts World expansions that are coming, which I think will drive outsized growth once those expansions are online. But I think with the Philippines, the way that the regulatory regime is running and the way the economy is going to be growing, I think they have a very strong potential to be the number 2 jurisdiction in Asia.
Okay, well, I want to
Thank our panelists. Oh, I didn't realize we were including iGaming as well. I didn't either. But anyway,
I had to throw a
thank
different
the
comment
panelists, and
in.
thank you as the audience,
I'd be repeating
and
what
we're going
everyone
to
said.
adjourn.
Thank you, and now Ruth Paul, Natalie, and of course Frederick for the perspective and advisory section. 喺度咧，都再一次感謝晒佢哋為我哋帶嚟咧咁有洞察力同埋意義性嘅環節啦。Thank you very much, and please take a seat and take some rest.
Thanks, Ed, for